So just settling into your chair, your sofa, whatever you're on. And take a few just slightly deeper breaths. And as you let go of the out breath, just feel yourself arriving. Feel that contact between your feet and the floor. Just that light sense of your weight bearing down through socks or bare feet into a carpet or whatever. And that sense of contact, pressure, as your backside rests in the chair, that sense of your weight bearing down. The body rising up from your sitting bones. The breaths coming and going, just gently, however they want to come. And just tuning into how you are at the moment, how you're feeling, just what it's like to be you. Tuning in maybe to any vedana that's there, whether it's one of something pleasant, sense of readiness, of interest. Any slight resistance, maybe a little bit of tiredness. And just whatever's there for you, just noticing it. Noting it's there, noting how it maybe affects your body. Maybe how it's been affecting your thoughts. And just bringing that to a close, and I'll begin. So I'm going to say a little bit more about vedana. Some of it, a little bit kind of theory, a little bit some of my own experiences in that realm. But of course, in the last hours, since this morning, maybe more than usual, maybe more than ever, you've been trying to be a little bit more aware of vedana in your experience. And I'm having a vedana of realizing a slight discomfort as I realize I'm looking at myself rather than you. That's better. I can see you now. Yeah, maybe you've been tuning in a little bit and just taking a pause every now and then and noticing maybe a passing moment, a feeling, a really basic feeling. Maybe you saw a particular configuration of clouds and just had a kind of moment of realizing, yeah, that's pleasant, that's nice, and just dwelt with it for a moment. Or maybe you even just simply had a thought, just a thought of, oh, I'm on retreat, or I don't have to go to work tomorrow, or just something. It was a little thought, but even so, it was a kind of sensory input, like the mind being one of the senses and the thought being an object of sense. It was just something that, oh, that's pleasant. Or maybe you had a little lie down after your lunch and just enjoyed a moment of relaxation, of letting go. And maybe, you stubbed your toe, or maybe you had a slightly angry thought or a worrying thought. And again, you didn't just have the thought, you didn't just have the toe stubbed, but you noticed that unpleasant feeling, and you were just able to be with that. Maybe be with it for long enough to just, in a way, strangely, maybe even paradoxically, savor it, notice it, be with it, rather than seeing it leading into other thoughts, other feelings, and just starting that whole process, which might have led to more thinking, maybe blame somewhere along the line, conflict somewhere along the line, and so on. It's kind of interesting, to notice that to take on board vedana as an omnipresent aspect of our experience. It's there all the time, moment by moment by moment. There is vedana, there's pleasant, unpleasant. experience unfolding, whether it's a thought, a smell, a sight, a conversation, an experience. Everyone is coloured, as Vimalachita put it this morning, with hedonic tone. And strangely, it's as if there is this treasure chest of opportunity there in front of us or within us every moment of every day. The possibility of savouring more of the pleasant dimensions of experience, more of an opportunity to notice and just pause, to dwell with maybe that unpleasant vedana, something that's maybe challenging, maybe difficult, and just to be with it and realize we have a choice whether to take it further. And maybe, even through today, if you've been making that effort to just take on board or to notice the vedana dimension of experience, you found it quite stabilizing, that you maybe have been a little bit less reactive to your experience than normally you might have been. I mean, vedana, I'm talking to a pretty experienced bunch of people, order members and mitras, as I understand it. So you're probably very familiar with the Nidana chain. You might also be familiar with the Honeyball Sutta, the Madhupindaka Sutta. So you've got a sense of vedana having this really quite crucial place in these chains. You have the build up in the 12 nidanas, the kind of the evolution of individual consciousness with all faculties and so on, up to a point where it's possible to have sense contact, and in dependence upon sense contact arises vedana, arises this primary dimension of feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. In the Madhupindaka Sutta, you have this combination of contact, feeling, and samnya of absolutely fundamental, basic, provisional labeling of experience, which again, a bit like with the 12 nidanas, if it's not handled right, if in a way, if nature takes its course, if our animal reactive nature takes its course, then vedana is the doorway which opens to all that follows afterwards: grasping, clinging, becoming, birth, death, dukkha, and so on. And in the Madhupindaka Sutta, it's that whole process that leads through our fundamental tendencies, through to thought, to prapancha, to fixed views, and ultimately conflict either within ourselves or with others. Vedana has this place in these models. These models make it all sound rather linear and stately, a progression of states, a progression of internal experiences. It's messier than that. You have to remember that a thought moment in the Pali world is 1/47th of a finger snap. So all this happens incredibly quickly. So, to be thinking of some stately progression of states is maybe not quite a good picture. It's much more important to sort of just think of ourselves as animals, beings, absolutely prone to react to experience incredibly quickly. But somewhere in the heart of that process is this trigger moment where all that's come before has given us the capacity to experience whether what's happening is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And the and is kind of crucial, because vedana stands at this kind of gateway, you could say, between the past and the future. It's that moment in our absolute present where the past, everything that we have been made by the past, whether in previous lives or in this life or this day or this hour, meets the possibility of a future. And so, it's a really, really critical element of our experience. It's where the result process, of the past meets the cause process of the future. Sangharakshita has described this place, this place in our experience as the battleground of the spiritual life. There is this gap, this tiny, tiny gap. Again, it's maybe quite useful to kind of slow the process down and imagine this stately progression. because imagining a gap within a 47th of a finger snap doesn't give us an enormous amount of space to work in. But there is this possibility, if we can bring awareness into that process at that point in the moment, in the present, where all there is actually in relation to our experience is vedanā, the experience of the hedonic tone of the moment, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, then there's just a chance we can be with it in a different way. So, how do we fight that battle? How do we fight on that battleground? How do we win that fight? Well, the message of the tradition is that we really do our best to learn how to rest in vedanā, to be willing to experience the raw, if you like, the raw experiential fact of what's happening before we allow our mind to get to work with it, to allow all our previous underlying tendencies to wrap themselves around it, before all the filters come in, before the proliferation of thinking comes in. But can we simply be with our experience as it is, without reacting into wanting more, wanting less, wanting to fight it, wanting it to go away, wanting to go into total denial of it? Can we either stay in that place, or if we've already lost it, if we've already got ourselves lost in proliferation or in the process of grasping and clinging and so on, can we at least roll back to it? There's this lovely phrase that I've seen. I think Subhuti, when he talks about the Hannibal Sutra, and I think I've seen it too in texts, this description of the process that if we go one way from Vedana all the way, start through prapancha towards fixed views and conflict, that direction is called ayoniso, and to roll back, to go back to Vedana is yoniso. And of course, yoni in the Indian tradition, it's the female organ, it's the womb, it's the place where life begins. And that's Vedana. It's the place where life begins. It's the place where the reactive life begins. But if we can just go back there, roll back, be willing to roll back to what's the experience? What's the actual root hedonic experience? Am I willing to just be with that rather than getting lost? Even if it's lovely, even if it's seductive, even if it feels necessary. Rather than getting lost in those reactive processes. If I stub my toe on something, am I prepared to just be the raw experience of the discomfort, or is it really tempting to try and blame Vimalacchitta for maybe having left something there for me to stub my toe on? It's so tempting, to go down that track, paradoxically, because sometimes it's incredibly painful for yourself and others to go down that track. But, am I prepared to just be with the experience, whether it's one of pleasure, of enjoying a mouthful of ice cream, or the pain of stubbing my toe? Can I just go back there and just be with that for a while, and maybe just watch the impulses, surging around, frothing around within me, and just letting them settle, and then having choice. That this was mentioned yesterday, one of the core takeaways from mindfulness practice, the root, in a way, the most important takeaway you could say we have from mindfulness practice is choice. Choice in how we're going to negotiate the rather fragile and insecure process of being human. And we are human. We have this capacity for reflexive consciousness. If we weren't human, well, we would live in a world of impulse and instinct. But you could say that this capacity to stay with the raw nature of our experience, or to roll back to it, is an essentially human possibility. And I say possibility because, well, as we know, we it's not one that just is a given. It does take work, it takes awareness, it takes mindfulness, it takes practice. And sometimes it takes time. For me, something that was I suppose, a defining experience in my life back in 1972-73, the FWBO in its early days, we sponsored a Japanese Soto Zen monk to come and hang out with us. You know, he would come on our retreats. I think I don't know where he lived. I don't think he lived with any of us because we didn't yet have many communities. I think he lived at Aryatara community for a while, but he would lead, he would even, you know, Sangharakshita would let him lead 2-hour Zazen periods during our retreats at Ketholds. And he would lead sessions at Aryatara in Croydon. I went on one. You know, I was fairly new. I suppose I'd been involved for a year or two. And I still hadn't developed flexible knees. Frankly, I still haven't. And I've actually lost what I ever gained. But there you go. And we sat for about 8-9 hours meditating. And we ate meals in the shrine room in meditation posture. And it was the most appallingly painful experience I think I'd ever known. It was all about pain. And that's what most of us talked about in the tea breaks. You know, when silence was lifted, we just talk about the pain we were in. And I would sit in that shrine room, hating Zenko, this immaculate priest in his black robes, off whom waves of peace rolled like ripples of the ocean. And I hated him because he wouldn't ring that bloody bell. And how much longer was it going to be? And this went on day after day after day. And I don't know what it was that happened, that one day I was just getting so in a state. I was saying something to myself like, this is torture. This is torture. And then I thought, you know, maybe a deva passed by and injected into my mind the thought, well, is it torture? Supposing I was a spy and my friends were spies and I'd been caught. If this is what they were doing to me, would I give them up? And it was strange because for the first time, I really examined what I was experiencing. And yes, it was deeply uncomfortable. You could even say painful, but you know what? It wasn't that bad. And it was one of those sort of aha moments when I realized just, you know, how much of a, you know, I didn't know about the second arrow. I didn't know about the Salata Sutra in those days. I just realized how much of the agony I'd been creating myself in my mind, and not only in my mind, but in the way I'd been tensing. And in a way, how much of the retreat I'd been almost wasting by virtue of being so totally lost in this idea of the pain I was in. And it was quite interesting because even though I was still uncomfortable, I just had a completely different attitude to the experience and worked with it in a different way. And it was the turning point in my retreat. And in a funny way, I still live off that experience. I still feed off that experience of realizing just how much of the emotion and you know, hellishness I created around my experience, which wasn't necessary, how much I'd added. And strangely, how much energy was released when I just allowed myself to stop doing that. And it kind of experienced the energy that was flying around in me rather than the thoughts. There's a beautiful moment in a documentary made back in the late 70s of John Kabat-Zinn, who was just starting his work in a pain management clinic at the hospital at UMass. You know, there's a woman who has really awful back pain, and he's just kneeling on the floor beside her during a body scan, just encouraging her. She's in tears in the pain, and he's encouraging her to allow herself to feel the pain and to notice what it's really like, you know, whether it's the same all the time, whether it's coming in waves. And you don't get an answer from her, she doesn't speak, but what you see is this astonishing transformation in her face as her attention shifts from her, you know, frenzy, you know, self-pity, anxiety, to that curiosity about the nature of her actual experience. It's a beautiful moment. It's, you know, whenever I watch it, it brings tears to my eyes. And if you can get hold of the documentary, which Vimla Chit will remember the name of it, and or Vijayamala, more likely remember the name of the documentary. It's worth a watch. There was a really interesting coda to that experience of mine in that shrine room with Zengo. After the session, I went home, and several of us from the community I was living in, it was one of the very first Triratna communities. We went home, and while we were away, some people had broken in, and it's a long story, so I'd simply say there'd been thefts. And, we'd been there a few days. We thought we'd tracked down everything that had been stolen. It wasn't that bad. Life went on. And we were living in London, quite near Hampstead Heath. And one evening, a lovely sunset, I thought, oh, I must go for a walk. I'll just grab my camera. So I opened the cupboard to get my camera out, and it wasn't there. And there was no way that camera wasn't there unless it had been stolen. And I opened the cupboard door, empty. I went, blast. Closed the door and went for a walk. And about half an hour later, it was like, what? I just, how cool was that? The camera was missing, and it was just, the camera was missing, and I'd gone for a walk. I could not believe the state I was in, just how calmly, how positively I'd taken that experience. And I think it's important. I'm not going to say that that's always been like that ever since, but what it proved was that, vedana, remember, is part of the result process. Vedana isn't just some absolute given. The quality of our vedana and our engagement with it depends upon conditions. And if we have created the right conditions, then the way we experience vedana, and even what we experience as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, is a movable feast. It's flexible. We're not condemned to thinking the same things will always be unpleasant or pleasant. Things or how strongly we'll be caught in them. We have an awful lot of control, a lot of choice. When around the time I was on that retreat, but maybe a little bit before, because I was working at the BBC and as a trainee assistant film editor, and the job of a trainee assistant film editor is basically a glorified filing clerk. The editor created, in those days, of course, before online digital editing, vast kilometers of celluloid, magnetic tape and picture. And your job as the assistant editor was to be constantly picking it up off the floor, literally, or a big sack on his desk, finding out by reading little numbers where it belonged and filing it under the right shot, the right take, and so on. And I was working for a bully of an editor who worked very fast. He wasn't bad, but he worked very fast and was a bully. And I was new, I'd not long been, there, and he made my life a misery because there was always more to process than I could cope with. It always meant working late, and every night I'd close the door on what I would call a nightmare that I was going to have to face the next morning. One weekend, I went off on my first retreat. We went down to Quatermain, I think, for a weekend retreat with Bhante, meditated, practiced, mindfulness of breathing, mettā bhavanā, talked, had nice weekend, nice people in the country, mindful walking and so on, puja. Monday came round on the bus to Ealing Studios it was, and kind of dreading the cutting room. I'd gone in early to face the cutting room because I knew I'd left it, in chaos on Friday night. And I opened the door of the cutting room and I thought someone had been in over the weekend to tidy it up. They hadn't. It was exactly as I'd left it on Friday, and there was still everything to do that I'd left to be done on Friday night, but it wasn't a nightmare anymore. It was just a job needing to be done. And again, it was just another astonishing aha moment of just realizing, good heavens, it's that different, the effect of my mind, the relationship between my mind and my experience of things, and whether something's a nightmare or just a job needing to be done. In a way, it proves, this sort of thing. I guess there's an important takeaway from this, or another one, which is that we can educate our Vedana. Our Vedana is not just flexible, dependent on conditions, but we can educate and refine our capacity for Vedana. Something that sometimes happens, if you go as a president to visit centres or a preceptor, and you just get to know people and you make friendships, and people are often very generous, and they, or they just might want to share their interests, give you a book or something that that they've liked. And there's a mitra in Holland. I think he left us a long time ago. A lovely guy, Karel Eichenraam. He played saxophone. He was into jazz, and he loved jazz and wanted to share with me his love. And he had this love for John Coltrane, about whom I knew nothing. And one day, I'm living at Sukhavati at the time, in Sukhavati community. A few days after I got back from Holland, this cassette arrives. And it's a cassette of John Coltrane and his combo, I don't know what. And I put it on thinking this is going to be, lovely or interesting. And I wrote to Carl, I said, I don't know if they were playing or falling down the staircase together. I simply could not even hear it as music. I certainly couldn't enjoy it. It was just a profoundly unpleasant experience. But of course, I wasn't educated into John Coltrane. I believe, I'm not certain if it is Beethoven, but I believe that when Beethoven emerged on the scene with his brand of symphony, some people thought it was his execrable noise. And it took them a while to kind of read it and hear it and know how to enjoy it. And I think, it's worth noticing, that our Vedana can be educated, and refined. And they're, perhaps we can all afford to notice, what are the Vedanas that we find pleasant? And therefore, what are the habits that we form? Connecting up with Vishvapani, talking about habit last night. What are the kind of movies that we'll choose to watch? Will we, if given a choice on Netflix between the film about zombies or watching a really mindful Japanese lady making a teapot from scratch, which one will we choose to watch? And yet, maybe it will be the zombie because it's easy. It's the dim light that attracts. But then one day, in an idle moment, we watch that Japanese lady making the teapot and it just blows our mind. But who'd have thought it? And maybe as a result of that, we'll think, I need to do a bit more of that. I can educate my capacity to enjoy more refined pleasure. I think in living with awareness, this is something that Sangharakshita talks about a bit, the necessity of refining our capacity to enjoy higher, more refined, more rarefied levels of pleasure. And of course, in the Satipatthana Sutta, there's a distinction made between worldly and otherworldly Vedanas. Of course, all Vedana can lead on to what follows. If we aren't prepared to just stay with the raw experience of Vedana, then there will be processes that unfold. In the case of refined, otherworldly Vedanas, well, there's perhaps the attachment to heavenly realms, to just coasting in dhyana levels, being a bliss bunny, or opting for spiritual bypassing rather than facing some of the other realities in your life. There's always going to be those traps, but probably for most of us, it will do no harm to engage with and enjoy, increasingly rarefied and enjoyed and refined levels of Vedana, and recognize that it's possible to educate our capacity to experience and enjoy and live with higher, more human, more truly human levels of experience and feeling. I think that will do. I think I'll leave it there because I know Vishvapani is going to lead us in meditation. I'm going to leave you with a poem, which it kind of connects. And anyway, I just like it and wanted to read it. It does connect, but I haven't got time to spell that out. But hopefully you'll see it. You'll see some of the connections for yourself. And it also fits in too with this theme that Vishvapani opened up last night of living on retreat in a kind of solitary, or for many of us, I suspect a solitary, or at least some kind of retreat mode in our ordinary world. It's called "Everything is Waiting for You" by good Lord, I've forgotten. I'm having a senior moment. David Whyte. David Whyte. So, your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely, even you, at times, have felt the grand array, the swelling presence, and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you freedom. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentor of things to come. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you, and the tiny speaker in the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. Thank you. And over to Vishvapani.
So, put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. Is that right, Nagabodhi? Yeah. So we'll do a meditation, and bearing in mind vedanā. You think about it, vedanā, it can sound one of these technical things, but actually, as Nagabodhi's been saying, it's there in the whole of our life. We can't, it's one of the 5 skandhas. Every perceptual moment has this feeling tone. We like things, we don't like things. So, of course, it's there in meditation. I found it interesting to reflect on the mettā practice in relation to vedanā, because if you think about it, the middle 3 stages of the mettā go through the 3 vedanas. So the people we like, the people we feel neutral towards, and the people we don't like. So it's the 3 vedanas. And we tend to sometimes say, I'm going to give a talk on the mettā if I'm not careful, rather than introducing it. But anyway, it's just interesting to reflect how that works. And that it shows that it's not about treating everyone as if they're our best friend. That's not what mettā is. That's not what the mettā is. It's not trying to make everyone as positive to us as our best friend is, because we don't like some people. And the practice isn't trying to persuade ourselves that we do like people. that we don't like. We don't like in the sense that we have, when we meet them or encounter them, the vedana is unpleasant. You can't really change that, actually. So what we can do is have mettā for people, even though we don't like them. So I found it quite interesting to reflect on that. And so we're not going to do the mettā bhavanā now, but we'll do a practice of just sitting with our experience, using quite a light structure with the breath as our anchor, the thing that stops us drifting off from the currents, and noticing our experience as it changes. So as, letting things come in. And some things we'll like, some things we won't like. That might be thoughts, that might be sensations. And we don't need to try to get ourselves to like the things we don't like. But we can still have a kindly, interested, friendly relationship with them. Okay, so have a bell. Don't always ring bells with this sort of thing, but I think I will today. One of the nice things about having a bell is just listening to it as a way to settle. Okay, so just, I don't know how this will work over my Wi-Fi and your Wi-Fi and all that sort of thing, but let's just settle ourselves and listen to the reverberations. So perhaps taking a moment to set ourselves up. If you want to turn away from the screen, then, or turn the screen away from you, then do so. I think there's something in that is about extracting ourselves from the virtual space. Just extracting ourselves from Zoom land. Okay. The cues for this practice are simply auditory, in my voice. You might not even want that. Feel free to turn the volume down. But you certainly don't need to be looking at me. You don't need to feel we're on Zoom while we're doing this practice. So where are we if we're not in Zoom? We're in this space, my space, your room, wherever it might be. This body. Perhaps having a sense of being present here in my physical domain by feeling the feet on the floor. And the bottom on the chair. Hands resting on our thighs or in our lap. Sensing warmth, cool, pressure. Sensing directly, there aren't words for the thing in itself. And as we settle, it might help to just open a window to the practices we've done already today. The 3 practices around Vedana that Vimalachita led. Just letting them come back to our mind. Noticing pleasant experiences. Noticing neutral experiences. Noticing unpleasant experiences. A whole spectrum of Vedana. So one theme is experiencing directly rather than noticing our conceptualizations. Notice a direct experience. Another theme is that when we do that, we like or are indifferent or dislike what we experience. Our response is located somewhere on a spectrum. And then we did mindful movement practice, doing qigong and similar things with sona. Again, experiencing directly. So just allowing the body to recall doing those movements, how that felt. Feeling the body in motion. Noticing how it feels. The other talks. Other experiences of awareness through the day. as we brought our mind to our direct experience. Notice liking and disliking, and what happens. How we attach or repel. Coming to our experience in this moment. Sensing the body. Whatever way our experience of the body manifests. What's vivid? What's hazy? What's unpleasant? Any discomfort? What's pleasant? And what's in between? So for a few minutes, just staying with our experience of the body in our own way, noticing the vedanas, noticing how we respond to them. And as we sit quietly, sensing the body, it may very well be that thoughts come in or have come in. Just noticing when we get involved with those thoughts. That there's a tug, a pull. And when we let go of those thoughts, there can be a feeling of absence, something missing, that tugs us back towards them. Which thoughts draw our attention? What's the feeling of being drawn? How is it to not go with that feeling? Experience arises and changes. Vedanas arise and change. So for a few minutes, just sitting without any particular object or focus or direction, just resting, settling, breathing. So we've been just tasting a little the practice, letting go, attachment to vedana, being driven by our responses to vedana. In the same spirit of letting go, we'll conclude second day of this retreat by reciting the transference of merit and self-surrender. I'll say it through, you can listen, and I'll allow little gaps so that you can repeat after me if you don't know the words yourself. Otherwise you can say it with me. May the merit gained in my acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. My personality throughout my existences, my possessions, and my merit in all three ways. I give up without regard to myself. For the benefit of all beings. Just as the earth and other elements are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings, inhabiting limitless space. So may I become that which maintains all beings, situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace. Good night. Tashidelek, namaste, shalom aleichem. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.